Hello. Also, Ewan, thank you for the £5. Didn't need to do that. Thank you so much. Hello. Sorry for the delay. My stupid phone was having some issues. Welcome. Hello, Busty. I feature. Also, thanks for the 5. I appreciate it. I don't even know. I guess that's through like YouTube Super Chat because I don't have that set up, but I guess it works. Hello, Xizix. Vito. Galaxy Perfect. Heart Sleaze. LTT2 will also feature AI-generated or profit tweets about your tracks. I'm doing good. How about you? Xizix. Hope you're all well. Hello, Iker. Hello, Pre. Enrico. Welcome, welcome. This is a spontaneous little stream that I wanted to do in celebration of, you could say, a new version of a plug data patch of mine that I started 1 or 2 years ago, I think, by now. I've been continuously updating and refining it, and now there's a 2.0 version, which hopefully simplifies the workflow for a lot of people. And besides that, I have a little, as you can hear already in the background, I have a little track playing in the background that is actually a project file that you can download right now. It is an Ableton Live 12 project file that's using Phaseplant, like Kilohertz's plugins only. Well, besides maybe a few native Ableton Live effects here and there. So just to showcase, this is it. Because obviously I didn't post it on my YouTube channel, but it's on the YouTube channel of Kilohertz. So if I switch the screen, you can see this is it. I may have to like resize this because I have an ultra wide, so it's a bit difficult. There we go. So this is, I think I have to zoom. Yep. This is the Kilohertz Phaseplant demo song by, well, me, basically. It is a free project file that you can download as part of the Patreon. It's a free tier, so all you have to have is a Patreon account, and you can download it. The track's mid-tempo in 110 BPM, 30 dominant scale, and it's sort of roughly half of an entire song, essentially. And it's using Kilohertz plugins. So I made a little visualizer / video here that you can watch on Kilohertz's YouTube channel that has a bunch of neat little visualizations for the individual Phaseplant patches that are playing at a current time. And yes, I bought millimeters specifically for this video because it was quite nice at visualizing. I did have to color this a little bit to look cohesive, but I think it's a joy to watch. So check out the video on the Kilohertz YouTube channel. The great people. This project was actually a bit humbling because, contrary to what this live stream is about, I was using only the things that were sort of available within the Kilohertz ecosystem. So when it comes to multiband compression, upwards and downwards compression, I had to get used to using Kilohertz's multipass dynamics. And it was quite a humbling experience because it was basically going back to the beginnings of having to dial in multiband compression yourself and having to do that for every sound and having to find good crossovers so that you get the maximum out of whatever set of compressors that you have. Whereas I was getting so used to using my Spectral compressor and not having to worry about that because it has so many bands that you don't have to worry. Dynamics, the Kilohertz Dynamics snap-in has been around for a bit, and I used that in combination with multipass. This is the actual project here. I have it open. Let me scale this Windows properly. Adjust it. So if you want, you can go to the Kilohertz YouTube channel, watch the video. If you like it, leave a like, and then you can head to the Patreon page right here and download it from there. You will require the latest version of Ableton Live 12 and the Kilohertz suite, but oftentimes you will have one or the other already if you're using Ableton. I did not make a FL Studio specific project or any other DAW projects, but it was specifically Ableton because that's what I use. Perhaps in the future it'll be Bitwig. I'm not entirely sure yet because I want them to fix their waveform rendering first before I switch. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about, but first of all, I'm going to just show you the project. So this is the project file. Everything in here is Phaseplant, besides some audio samples that are like either resampled bits from the same track or like some effects, right? Just some basic stuff. But you could dissect every single patch. Like the main lead, for example, a lot of people like this one. Let me turn that up. So you can watch that, give it a go. A lot of the bass sound design in here, of course, is as well. And the drums are synthesized. So the kicks, the snares, all of them are Phaseplant presets that you can check out and take a look at. Specifically using the new clipper and a really cool compression technique. The cymbals, though, are not, they're just samples. But all the sidechaining is done using Snap Heap. I still prefer like kickstart and regular sort of volume shaping because it's just the easiest and most convenient way. So I really like using kickstart, for example, but in this case, obviously I couldn't use that. So I used a method of using Snap Heap, splitting the band up into a low and high band, and then having gains on there, and then I would have individual shapes for those that will be triggered by the incoming sample. And then I am doing this thing where you delay the incoming signal so that the sidechain ducking shape happens before. So it has about 10 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds in this case to dip out, then be at 0 and come back up. And then I'm using the track delay in Ableton to bring it back forth. And the thing is with Snap Heap's modulators is that they are not sample accurate. They happen in a 64 sample buffer. So they can be kind of shifting back and forth a little bit depending on when that happens, because otherwise the Kilohertz guys have told me that it can be very expensive when you have audio rate modulators happening. So if you do something quite simple as like modulating filters or modulating amplitude, like LFO tool, then it's usually pretty easy to do. But in this case, they have a 64-bit 64 sample buffer. 1 second, I'll be right back. All right, are we back? Is the stream still alive? Because my display just turned off. Black screen. Ah. But are we back? Is it back? I think we're back, right? Yes. Yeah, so my monitor's battery just ran out because I was using the air fryer earlier. So we have to juggle the power inside the caravan. So when we use the air fryer, we have to turn off we have to have the monitors on the battery, and that's plugged into the main battery, and sometimes I forget to plug it back in, and then yeah, an hour later, an hour or two later, the monitor turns off. Anyways, I'm using that for sidechaining, so it's not. I don't think it's quite as pristine as using a kickstart still. But it got the job done quite well. So I'm using that for sidechaining everywhere. And then, of course, you've got your bread and butter synths in here. And the main reason why I did this project is because I wanted to challenge myself to do sounds in Phaseplant again after having explored Serum 2 for a bit. Because I still greatly benefit from the workflow that I have in Phaseplant, and I still think that a lot of the ecosystem is just still better. Like there's still nothing out there that is as convenient as the Phaseplant ecosystem or the Kilohertz ecosystem in terms of workflow, right? It hits the sweet spot in terms of how much you can do and how complex things can get without getting too complex and without getting too simple. And it doesn't have any compromises. which is great. So yeah, check out the project file. It should also be fairly optimized. I'm on a new computer, so it runs pretty well on this one. I'll have to check what my buffer size is. 512. There's a good amount of cool sounds in here, and as you can see, there's, for example, this one, there's no post-processing outside of Phaseplant. So this is the part where I was talking about getting humbled. I had to use multipass with dynamics to get the sound to where I wanted it to be. Was Kilohertz developer pointing gun at you while you were making music? No, they were not. I actually started this without Kilohertz in mind. I just kind of did it for the sake of it, because I wanted to not move over to Serum 2. I kind of wanted to stay at Phaseplant, and I wanted to challenge myself. But then they were like, oh, this is really cool. We could use this as super booth at in Berlin 2025, where I was at as well. We will use it as a demo project there. And so I wanted to make sure that pretty much everything was native kilohertz and maybe a utility or EQ8 somewhere that is part of Ableton. But yeah, the challenging part was not being able to use spectral compressors, etc. So being limited to what you can do with multipass and the dynamics effect. And I've learned a lot from it, because it's with multiband compression, it's more about finding good crossover frequencies, and then you can just, compress away essentially. Whereas with spectral compressors, you don't really have to care about it so much, because the density is so high that you don't have to find those sweet spots. Then I can get into that in a second as well. But what we can do is we can get onto some of these sounds, and I can show you what this stream is actually about, which was Specom Light 2, which I released this weekend. I think it was on Friday or Saturday. Well, last weekend, right? Because today's Monday. I wonder if Kilohertz are going to release any spectral stuff. Maybe. Who knows? I mean, filter table is kind of spectral, right? And it is actually a huge reason why I wanted to stay at Phaseplant, because filter table is very, very powerful. Love the ecosystem and the sound design possibilities. Yes, same. Hello, Facepilot. I'm glad to hear that you missed me. But yeah, so Specom Light 2, or as I put into the title, very clickbaity, OTT 2, right? Here's a little page of the Patreon site. So this is actually still the same page that Specom Light 1 was in. So I didn't make a new post. It's the same post, but I've basically just replaced everything. And if you want to access the old version, or the latest version that was before 2.0, you can do so here via 1.1, 1.6 plus manual, so that older projects can just work, right? So that it's backwards compatible. Specom Light 2 is more optimized, it's more efficient. There's less assets to them, so it's smaller file size. And this is what it looks like. You have a bunch of little GIFs just showing you what this thing can do. And I thought, might as well make some sounds in Phaseplant and post-process them with Specom Light 2, so you guys can get an idea of how it works and how easy it is to use. Epic NASCAR stream for my birthday. Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Happy birthday, by the way. I found absolutely nothing that can replace Phaseplant for me. I cannot live without it anymore. Yes. Same. But yeah, so let's go over Specom Light 2. I think I'm going to pick probably this section. Maybe this. Lower the volume of that. So, Specom Light 2 runs in plug data effects in this case. So it's just plug data effects is essentially like Max for Live or Max or Native Instruments Reactor. It's free and open source, so you can just download it from their website, and and it is quite stable on Windows, very much stable on Windows. I'm not sure exactly about macOS. It should be pretty stable there too. But the host itself, essentially the platform, is free. And then obviously you can get the Specom Light 2 version on my Patreon under the Elite tier, which is like $16. So this is Specom Light 2. This is what it looks like. Quite different from Specom Light 1.6 and the recent GUI update that I did. It's all using vector graphics that are rendered to PNG files, so it looks all quite clean. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it a little bit easier on the stream. It'll be a little bit more pixelated, but it should be fine. So the way Specom Light 2 works is that it's very similar to the first. It removes one feature that I find to be quite niche and could be more useful in the regular version, and keeps the workflow more streamlined. So what you have here is your main spectrum analyzer in the middle that's showing you the current frequencies, and then what you get is this main dial that you can turn up, which I'm going to do now. So as you could kind of hear, it was kind of flattening the mids, boosting the lows a little bit, and boosting the high end specifically. I'm going to bring in a... Actually, yeah, I have Fab... Oh, I've only have FabFilter. That is a new computer, so I don't have all the plugins. Let me grab... I think Slice... No, I think EQ8 is probably good, so you can kind of see what's going on. Let me actually bring up Spectrum. There we go. Can you guys see the spectrum down here? Get it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to turn this up again so you can kind of see. I'm going to have another spectrum down here. So you have a small version and a big version. So you can kind of get an idea. So if I'm going to turn it back up again, you can kind of listen to it. It's harder to see on the big spectrum, but you can kind of see how we're getting this pretty clean, tilled, compressed spectrum from Specom Light 2. If I bring it back out, we're getting this pre-compressed signal that is very heavy in the mids and somewhat on the lows, and then slopes off towards the highs. And then we push it back up. We get this very, very sort of flattened, compressed spectrum. There's multiple things to this that work specifically well because of the smoothing algorithm inside of Specom Light. So what I have here as well is I can go ahead and change the smoothing amount. So if I turn the smoothing down, you'll hear what a regular spectral compressor sounds like. And you can see the spectrum is now completely flattened. And sounds... I have to somehow turn off the volume there. Sounds very noisy. Hello, Zeph Parisotto. This ain't linear phase by any chance, is it? It is. It is an FFT spectrum compressor. So it is also linear phase, which is great. It uses a 1024 FFT, so 512 bands, essentially. It's a 512 band compressor. But what's really special about it is the smoothing algorithm that I've implemented. It is a sort of a smart spectrum averaging algorithm that smooths out the compression curve. And this is what it does. So right now you can hear that this particular portion is very noisy with the spectral compression at 100%. I have to turn this back up. Goat was just going through the Phaseplant project file, so sick. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying it. So you can see how we are getting a really, really flattened spectrum. And it's super noisy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn up the smoothing so you can see how it's sort of making it more organic and more natural. So towards the high end, you're still keeping a lot of the... So I'm going to turn it down again. You're still keeping a lot of the detail, but where the mids are, it's turning out to be less noisy. Now what I can do as well is I can turn up the release to have the compression not be so aggressive. And then I can play around with the target and tilt. So these are really important. What these basically determine is the target volume of the threshold, essentially, of the compressor. And then the tilt changes the sort of the slope of the compression threshold across the spectrum. So at a minus 3 dB, you're essentially getting a pink noise threshold, while at 0, we're essentially getting white noise. If we go ahead and pull back, now we're sitting around pink noise, and if we go all the way down, we're sitting at brown noise. Yes, I'm going to go to bass design in a second. Then you have the target, so you can offset the threshold of the compressor. So you can see we're starting from 0 dB here. I'm going to have to turn this up. So you can see it's pretty accurate. If you take a look at the output here, I'm going to move this over. You can see the compressor is now compressing the lowest frequency, which is kind of right here, to 0 dB, and then sloping off everything else across the spectrum. Pull it back a little bit, then tilt it back up. It's to -4. And then I'm going to dial back the compression. Dial it back in. So that's what it does on just a regular mix, right? So let's move over to some basses. I'm going to get rid of these things right here. And the thing is that this particular project is already well sort of mixed. I kind of had to. But if I go here, let's go over to this sound. I'm going to disable the sidechain. Thank you, Saravati. So I'm going to load up Specom Light 2. And I'm going to start turning up the compression. Turn up the smoothing, turn up the target. And usually, sometimes for drops, you might want a little bit of a brighter mix. So what's happening here is we're doing upwards and downwards compression, and we're essentially compressing all the frequencies towards this target, then using spectrum smoothing to make everything sound nice and smooth. The target is literally just dB based. Then we have makeup gain. So if you decided to, you know, change the volume after the compression, you can do that. And then you have a mix, which is also linear phase. Now, another important part about Specom Light 2 is that you have upwards and downwards compression separated. Specom Light 1 and up to 1.6, the way it worked was that the first 50% of the compression dial gave you downwards compression, and then the other 50% gave you upwards compression. So the last 50% gave you then 0 to 100% upwards compression. In this case, I've made it a linked control. So you have the main control dial turning up both, but then if you want, you can adjust each individually. So I can say I only want downwards compression, also visualized right here, or I only want upwards compression. You can then change the target. So you can do the sort of, more classical method of having a low target threshold, turning up the downwards compression, and then turning up the makeup. And then you can mix that in parallel and get those kinds of sounds. But the main idea of Specom Light 2 is to be efficient at what it does. So usually what you do is you load it up on a sound that needs it, turn up the compression dial, and then turn up the target until the volume is right, because it's already a pink noise, so usually it'll sound pretty good. In this case, I wanted to show off what it sounds like for group processing. So in this project, I used this particular setup right here, where I am using upwards compression on the higher frequencies right here. So I'm doing a little bit of upwards compression, and I'm doing a little bit of downwards compression, but the idea is to bring out a lot of the dynamics in the entire drop section, without actually affecting much of the loudest harmonics or the loudest sounds. And that's the cool part about upwards compression, is that you can keep your transients and whatever kind of just clean. You're not really affecting the loud frequencies. You're only pulling up the low frequencies. So you're not affecting formants and whatnot. So what I can do here is I can just disable these dynamics, because I'm going to keep the limiter. I want to keep the sub at a specific level. And I'm going to have Specom Light just before it. So you can hear how things are a little bit less dynamic now, one sound after another. So what I can do is I can roughly align my target curve where I want things to be. And then I can start just using upwards compression. And all that does is bring stuff that is too quiet up and just doesn't even touch the things that are already loud enough. And if we wanted to, we could even make it a little bit brighter by changing the tilt to, say, -2. Once again, this particular track is already well mixed, so there's not really a lot to do there. What we can do, though, is we can try and remove some of the multiband compression that I have on certain sounds and see what it sounds like with Specom. So, for example, I have that sound. I'm going to disable this particular Specom right here. And then we can see in the patch, I have a little bit of an EQ and the multiband dynamics right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable both of these, the slice EQ and the multipass, because they're essentially mixing tools. Now, if I bring in Specom Light, you can really see what it's doing when it's doing both upwards and downwards compression on a signal that's not been compressed yet. Let's bring up the target curve, target volume. Let's change this moving. That is too much compression. There we go. Without it. And there we go. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that the sub is sitting at a bit of a louder volume, because this is kind of just natural for EDM, for the sub to be just a little bit louder. So I'm going to put it at -2. Then when we play it back, let's remove it. We have this other layer, which I'm going to disable, so we can just hear the sound. Turn it up. If we wanted to even, we could disable all the multipasses in this case. So I'm going to go to the next sound here. I have to be careful with this one though, because the reverb might be happening after. Yeah, so this is difficult. I would have to probably throw the reverb somewhere else. We have one instance of multiband compression right here, so I'm going to disable that. So that's what it sounds like without Specom Light 2. I'm going to throw it on now. Let's turn it up. Turn on the smoothing. Turn it up. We can really hear how in this case it's actually keeping the performance quite a bit better than the multiband compressor did. Maybe I can even go ahead and save the reverb throw as a quick preset and move it after, because we obviously don't want to overcompress that. So, oh, I think it was actually a snappy preset. So let me get rid of this. There we go. So without it, if we play it with it. Let's go to the first one. Let's see where the multiband compressor is situated. Is right here. Again, as you can see, I'm using the kilohertz dynamics with upwards and downwards compression, basically at the same threshold, and then I'm just moving this threshold around until I get the target volume that I want. Instead of working with thresholds, I rather want to call it a target, because that's where we're compressing to. We're targeting this particular volume, rather than saying, oh, if this is the threshold and something is over, we compress it down, and something is below, we compress it up. I'm just going to call it a target, right? This is our target volume. So that's what the multipass is doing here. Without it, it sounds like that. I'm going to bring in Specom Light 2 and bring it up. We don't even have to use it at 100%. We can be using it at less. Let's try messing around with this moving. And now we can even decide, hey, maybe we want less downwards compression, right? So we're going to bring down the downwards compression. And now we're getting a little bit more of the original harmonics that was sort of strong in the mids. And there we go. So this is without it. And with it. So I could keep this keep doing this for every sound, but that's sort of the idea, right? Is you put this on, turn up the compression, and kind of call it a day. So what I wanted to do now is do some experimental sound design and Phaseplant with some of the new techniques that I've been learning, and just show you how easy it is to essentially do sound design with a spectral compressor kind of already in place. because it'll bring up a lot of the, it'll kind of just fix all the mixing stage for you, because everything will be already kind of catered towards pink noise, which is kind of the goal that we want. So I'm going to load up a fresh project here. I'm not going to save this. If you want the project file, it is once again on the Color's channel, YouTube channel. You can watch the video there. But for now, let's go ahead and load up a fresh instance of Phaseplant and do some sound design. I'm going to load up Specom Light as well. So I'm going to just have this here, and we're going to see at which point in the sound design stage we're going to bring it in. So let's go ahead and load up some wavetable. So another thing that I found to be really cool that I've recently learned is that you can key track the comp filter in Phaseplant and get sort of the same comp filter odd or even harmonic filtering that you can get, for example, in Serum 2 with the new alternative watt modes in Serum 2. And you can actually do this for anything as long as you're using one of the lanes for the wavetable. So what you do is you just send this to lane 1 and treat a lane 1 as a sort of effects chain for the wavetable only. So for example, if we bring in a wavetable that is rather messy or rather complex, that has even and odd harmonics, and we can kind of check this out with Slice EQ. If we go ahead and go exact, change the UI scale here so we can make it smaller. Let's go grab one of the complex ones. What we can then do is we can use this lane as essentially our bunch of wavetable effects. So I can go in and add, for example, the comp filter. I'm going to go ahead and MIDI track this. So whatever MIDI note we're playing, it's now tracking the comp filter. In this case, I want to use the odd frequency filtering, and I'm going to have to turn this up an octave to 880 hertz, and suddenly we're getting Squarify. Whatever wavetable we pick, we're getting Squarify. So now what I could even do is I can do some FM. So if I take the comp filter off, now the comp filter does make things a little bit louder, so we want to turn this down. Another thing we can, for example, do now is as well as adding a filter, for example, and just boosting a certain peak. And we can then also key track that. So now we're essentially building our wavetable effects on top of our main wavetable, and we're using one of the lanes as sort of a real-time wavetable effects section. So the same thing counts for example, the filter table. So we could load up the filter table and map the cutoff. In this case, we want to maybe offset it a little bit and change it to a different wavetable. Let's do square 40. Let's bring it in. And then perhaps now we want the Squarify to be the last thing in the chain. So we can do that. Theoretically, you could do this just regularly, right? You can kind of do this. You could do this beforehand. But I find this workflow to be particularly interesting because it means the idea of having these these warp modes for the wavetables can be kind of extended in Phaseplant by just making one of the lanes essentially your warp mode sort of thing, right? Because in terms of other warp modes that are wavetable or other oscillator dependent, you can just do this within the generator section. I can add a modulator here, a wavetable, and go to the modulators and pick, for example, asymmetrical phase modulation, and I do this at 90 degrees. Now you can see how it's changing the waveform there. And we can't really hear much of a change right now because we have a lot of stuff going on. We might want to move this before here as well, if that makes a difference. Let me disable the... lower the... So everything now stays in the odd harmonics. And what gets really fun about that is that we can start adding just sine waves. And we can start ring modding that. So now we have a constant harmonic in there, or what we could do is we could bring in a wavetable that has a bunch of interesting harmonics. I'm going to go to the additive section here. And now I'm getting some really crazy sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and map the wavetable position of all of these, kind of move them around a little bit. Hello, Doggo. And what's really cool about this is now I can go down into the harmonic section. And I can move around the additive wavetable and change the partials to be at different pitches, and it all still goes through the comp filter. Hello, Saturn. Now, all of this is just Phaseplant sound design stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in Specom Light, and you can see how usable the results will be. Have this at 80%, turn out the release, and this moving. So what I can do now is I'm gonna remove the slice EQ and add it after the fact. I'm gonna have it after Specom. So you can see what's going on. So the problem with slice EQ for me personally right now is that it has a tilt. I think it's either 3.3 decibels per octave or it's 4.5. But the idea here is that it essentially get a flat spectrum to EQ towards. So you can see without it, we're getting this sharp roll off towards the high end, especially if we start turning up the filter table. We're getting a bunch of peaks and notches. And then with Specomp, we can control that. We can even maybe add a separate sine wave and have that not be part of the lane 1. So we get a consistent sub. Yeah, you can see. You can kind of figure out what their tilt is in this case. I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to disable both of these oscillators here, and I'm just going to run through some noise. So lane 2. And then I'm going to bring this down a little bit. I'm going to check. Oh, wow. They're at like almost looks like 5 dBs of a tilt, which is pretty extreme. I personally wouldn't go for a 5 dB tilt. Hopefully this is just a bug. I think minus 3 dBs is usually 3 dBs per octave is usually normal, but this looks to be 5 dBs. So then what we can do is we can set our Specom Light to have the same 5 dB tilt, and that should roughly line up in terms of harmonics. We may have to turn down the smoothing. And there you go. So this would theoretically, as you can see, completely flatten it. Yeah, 6 dB tilt is kind of crazy, right? What I would go for is minus 3 or minus 4. And then this moving in this case makes all the difference. So what we can do now is we can also just bring in some of the squarify, not all the way. We can start making this rhythmic. And maybe now this is the stage where we can start doing some regular sound designing. So I'm going to go ahead and add some volume. I'm going to add a little bit of delay. But I'm going to go ahead and put that into a separate chain. Go ahead and use some filtering. Let's bring in another one so we can stack them, because that gives you really, really cool results. And then lastly, I'm going to bring in a flanger and make sure that that flanger is also consistent. I'm just going to use the beginning part of this section here. I'm actually going to make it bipolar too. And then we can start messing around with the filter table and see what kind of cool results we get. Let's put it to legato, turn on this kind of stuff. I'm going to go ahead and add some convolver to this, so we get some nice dispersion. And now you can see the smoothing has a big effect on how many frequencies are still being compressed or not. One more thing I forgot to mention, actually, is that you get target curve presets. So you get the flat tilt, which you can obviously adjust. Then you get a sloped tilt, which is going to give you a slope towards the high end. As you can kind of see it on the, if I turn this down all the way, you can see it on the high end there. If I had it not, it would be a clean line. Otherwise, I'm going to load up a EQ8 so you can see it there. Disable all the filters here. So that's the flat tilt. Then you have sort of a slope off, which is really nice for natural instruments. And then you get the OTT curve, which gives you that sort of elevated sub and then the sort of smoothed out frequency response This I actually properly sampled OTT's frequency response by grabbing a white noise sample, putting OTT on it, and then I had that as a frequency response for Specom. The problem is that obviously not everything that comes into OTT is white noise, but the idea there is that we want to have the most sort of unbiased signal possible, which is usually if every amplitude is the same, right, which would be white noise. But since OTT is nonlinear in nature, I've actually smoothed out the spectrum curve a little bit that I recorded, so you can see it's a little bit smoother than what OTT would do on white noise. But as you can see, this has the elevated sub. Let's go ahead and start messing around with the sound here. You can see how I can change all of this stuff, but it all stays nice and odd harmonic. And we can obviously lower this. We could obviously make it stereo as well if we wanted to. So that's kind of for like rhythmy kind of darker sounds. You can do that. Now I want to see how well Specom Light does with growls, right? So I'm going to hit new, and I'm going to start off with a rather noisy wavetable. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in one of the complex wavetables right here. You can immediately see in the EQ8 here, when I have Specom Light on, without it, this is the spectrum that we're getting from the wavetable. And then this is the spectrum that we get after Specom Light 2. We can go flat again if we wanted to. And trust me, like, this is way easier to mix than this, right? You can still use the smoothing here. Just moving it out a little bit. So next up, I'm going to move around this particular little bit here in the wavetable. Then I'm going to go ahead and use a wavetable, and I'm going to use the ring mod wavetable that I had in here. I think it was one of the special ones here. And I'm just going to do some ring modulation. And perhaps before that, we do a little bit of formant shifting. Then we can go into the regular method of using bandpass. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to be now, the secret sauce with using bandpass and Specom Light is that oftentimes OTT has one thing that Specom Light 2 doesn't have, even if we switch to the OTT curve, and that is the dispersion that it causes and the sort of nonlinear nature of the multiband compression. So what I can usually recommend is to at least have one OTT in here instead of 3. Because one OTT is not going to be enough. But combined with Specom Light 2, we're getting much cooler sounds. Now we can add maybe some formant filter. And the last thing I want to add is some proper dispersion, so I'm going to add convolver. And then use some kind of one of those. Yes, all of this is still PNG, and I've made sure that I reuse assets. Like you can see the obviously this is the same asset, but I've made sure that a lot of this stuff is quite optimized. Like all of this stuff is all one PNG, so you have all of the dynamic UI sort of happening on top of it, stuff like that. And the 2.0 version is separate. So this is kind of one thing I decided is like if there's like a 2.0 version, right, it's not built upon the first. So you can't just replace the folder and have it work. It has to be a separate folder. But I still have version 1.6 essentially as a legacy version for people that, you know how it is. Until we get 0.9.2 plug data, we're going to have to kind of work around the folder system. There we go. So we can start messing around. We can start turning up down the release to get even more aggressive. Try a different phasing. And now my favorite is actually using filter table. So we're just gonna add filter table in here. I'm gonna switch this to linear. Let's move through this a little bit faster too. Yes, SVGs are going to be amazing. 100%. Let's add a separate sub here and just send it out. So you can see how the separate sub actually had a huge effect on the way Specom now reacts in terms of the smoothing. Because it factors the sub in now, which is very, very loud compared to everything else. So I'm going to have to turn up the OTT section. It's because the compressors are working extra hard when there's even quieter low-end frequencies because of the bandpass filter. So in that case, I was always wondering, how can we potentially keep the low end frequency information? So theoretically, we should be able to use a low pass filter. But I'm not sure why it just never quite works. When you just want to keep the low end, it just doesn't quite work. So that's why you usually use a bandpass. Now what gets really crazy is when we start using different kinds of wavetables. So for example, I could use one of the additive ones. We're getting crazy overtones. Now, again, without Specom, we're getting that, which is going to be quite tough to mix. You're going to have to use multiband compression. And if you want, I can show you a little example of how that would look, if you guys are down, in the chat. Just to kind of compare how many instances of like Kudat dynamics we would need and multipass and stuff, just to get to kind of like a similar result. I would be really interested to see what this sounds like with odd harmonics. So I'm going to add the key tracked comp filter. Oh, it sounds really cool. Yes, this is going to stay on YouTube. So the way I would process this is I would take this down, and this is for anyone that just wants to stay within the kilohertz ecosystem that doesn't want to use a third-party plugin. You just grab Multipass if you have it. You could also technically use Snappy, but I would recommend it. And you're going to grab the dynamics module, and all you really want to do in this stage, which is just pure upwards and downwards compression, is you want to unify the threshold for both upwards and downwards compression so you can move them both at the same time. That's very, very important. Then what you want to do is you want to pull down the downwards compression all the way and pull up the upwards compression all the way. So what you're now doing is you're forcing this particular band to have this target volume. So if I'm telling the thresholds to be at minus 16 dB, that's where it's going to compress it to. So if we can, if we add even more bands, we can then have different parts of the spectrum target different volumes. In this case, we may want to go for something like the sub-region. We want that to be really close to 0 dB. Then the lower mids, we don't really want to be too loud. Then the mids, we want them to be a little bit louder. The upper highs, we obviously want them to be louder. And then the highs, we want them to be the loudest. Now, this is all very, very loud in total. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to lower the target volumes a little bit. And that's how we're going to change the volume of the entire thing. Still very, very loud. I'm wondering why. I guess this is a very loud, yeah, this is a very loud target volume. So usually somewhere around the high end, you actually want to target something like minus 16 dB. So if we're going to turn this down. And you can see how moving the crossover obviously very heavily affects the frequency spectrum. So if I make this a little bit smaller, and so that you can see the slice EQ here. You can see how the fundamental is very unstable when we include a lot of other frequencies in this lower band. If we push it really to that fundamental, then we can really control just the fundamental. But the problem with multiband compression, and this is why I kind of call Spectral compressors OTT2, like literally 2, is because they use the FFT process, and you have so many bands that at this point the crossover doesn't really exist, especially because the individual FFT bands are such a high slope, I think around 96 dBs, that they don't have any bleeding from other bands. So a frequency around this, a band around this area doesn't have any frequency bleeding from bands below it or bands above it. So that's why it can be so accurate. When you work with multiband compression, you have to be really careful where your crossovers are set. And there's really a job about moving around and seeing where you set your bands. Now, in this case, for example, one instance of multipass with all of these all of these compressors is actually not enough. You can kind of hear that it's quite aggressive on the high end, and it's because we have these really strong peaks that the compressor is picking up. So it's gonna just focus its compression curve on those peaks rather than all of the noise below it. So one way you could try and work against that is to either lower the release. If that doesn't do enough, well, you can just duplicate it. And then we can lower the target volumes a little bit. Move around the crossover. But you can still see, especially this sound is super hard to work with. So you might want to add some extra noise layer, for example. So I can go in and add a noise layer and make sure that that's high passed. And then I'm going to make sure that it's ring modulated by the wavetable. So now you can see we're adding a lot of noise to the high end, which makes it a lot easier to mask those peaks. So now I can probably actually only go with one multipass. Yep, as you can see. Just adding that noise helped us just really deal with those high peaks. But this is the kind of stuff that we don't need to deal with if we're using spectral compression. Because the spectral compression has such a high frequency band resolution that it's picking up all of the noise in between those loud partials and pushing it up. Let's throw out the formant filter for the phaser. I'm going to lower the spread and the depth and turn up the order. Maybe we don't even need this OTT? Oh, we kind of do. At least one OTT is kind of necessary. But what I also like doing on growls is actually adding a flanger at the end. So if we just add a flanger here, and we have a regular triangular LFO shape, just adding a little bit of that on the high end sounds really nice. You get that sort of notch happening around the high frequencies. In this case, kind of gets diminished a little bit by the multiband compression, by the upwards compression. So let's turn that down a little bit. Actually, really can't. Can't turn it down. So let's see as an example what downwards compression would do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the sound real loud. So we have certain harmonics that are getting close or beyond our threshold. As you can see, those lower mid frequencies are going beyond our threshold. So if I just do upwards compression, you can see how we're retaining the lower mid frequencies are still pushing beyond that. So what we can do as an example is we could have a strong harmonic at, I'm going to do this with Slice EQ because Slice EQ can go a lot harder. So say we wanted that note, but we didn't want that note to be compressed, right? So regular multiband, like the way Specom Light and Specom worked, is if I turn this up, it would sort of compress the upper harmonic here as well. We would hear less of it. The idea now is that you can turn down the downwards compression and not affect those really loud harmonics, while still using the upwards compression. If we wanted to compress the upper harmonics, we can do that. So now with compressing it, we can actually turn down the threshold. Like right over there. Turn that down again. Turn up the upwards. So you can see it works. We can say, oh, I only want to push up everything that's really quiet. Or, oh, I actually also want to kind of tame the really loud frequencies. You can do both of those things now, which is amazing. What's the problem with Bitwig's rendering? Just look at the way waveforms are rendered on the playlist, on the timeline. They have this like bipolar sort of fill, right? So if a sine wave is above the 0 dB or the minus infinite dB line, the zero crossing, it'll get filled from the line up. And the same happens kind of for when the frequency goes down. So everything looks a little bit to me like a chessboard almost. Ruben, this is the new OTT, and Specom Light 2. This is no, it's not literally called OTT. The thumbnail is a little bit clickbaity, but the idea of OTT 2 is that it's essentially a spectral compressor rather than a multiband compressor. This one isn't. There is a free one out there though, which is called Spectral Compressor by Robert van something. I forgot something with D at the end. But Specom Light 2 is pretty cheap. You can get it on my Patreon for $16 US essentially. And the reason why that is because there's a lot of time put into workflow, UI, and specifically the smoothing algorithm, because most spectral compressors do not come with smoothing. So as an example, I'm going to disable the Slice EQ. As an example, this is the signal coming in, so I'm going to make that a little bit louder here. This is without Specom Light. I'm going to turn up the downwards compression as well. Without it. With it. Now, this is what most regular spectral compressors will sound like. They'll sound quite noisy. They'll take out a lot of the character. So what I've done is I've figured out a smoothing algorithm that retains a lot of the character from the original signal. So now you're getting this ultra compressed sort of maximized signal that's using 512 individual bands of compression across the frequency spectrum to essentially get you a ready to mix signal that you can use in your songs. Now, there is other compressors like by Oak Sound. Bloom is actually a spectral compressor, but you do not have any control over the smoothing amount. Then you have Mulder Productions Spectral Dynamics, which is great, but apparently it has some bugs and it's quite expensive. I think it's like $100 if I remember correctly. So what I wanted is a very affordable version of this that still has a lot of the benefits of being essentially funded by the community, because everyone that's subscribed to the Patreon is essentially helping me fund and update these patches. So they can get a bit better. So this version 2 is essentially just me continuously working on this patch and making it better over time. I think the first version is like a year old at this point. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, so we're at the point where I figured out a good system for it, where I feel like over time, people using it, it kind of became very clear, like what the sort of intended workflow is. So yeah, it's a growl bass with some crazy overtones. Been on your Patreon for a while. This is amazing, man. Gonna change sound design a lot. Thank you so much. So that's a bass growl. What other kinds of sounds do you guys want me to try this on? I actually think I have a few interesting presets here. Oh yeah, another thing that I wanted to mention. If you want to stay entirely inside of Phaseplant, there is a really cool, undervalued or underused effect that actually does not something similar to Specom, but that does something really cool. And that is Carve EQ. So I'm actually going to load up the this sound. But I'm going to load up a wavetable that is a little bit more predictable. I'm going to turn up the... Actually, we might want to... Yeah, we're going to use that. So then what I want to do is I want to compress it at least a little bit, because obviously we're doing this within Specom, within Phaseplant, so we're just going to be using the kilohertz dynamics to push this to the volume that we want it to be at. You may also want the sub to go into lane 3. There we go. So the secret kind of finalizing effect that you can use in your patches is called Carve EQ. And for a very particular reason, what you want to do is in Carve EQ, once you're done with a sound, you don't really want to mix it, but you kind of just want to have it be ready for mixing, essentially, is what you want to do in here is you want to go to the match tool. And then what you want to do is you want to create a profile out of a file. In this case, a pink noise file, for example. So I'm going to go to the reference tool. I'm going to go to sidechain, and then I'm going to go to create profile from file. And in this case, it's going to be a pink noise. It can either be mono or stereo. I'm just going to make it mono. And then what it does, it figures out a pink noise slope from the pink noise sample, essentially. And hit OK. And so now you can see we have this profile in here, which we can now save as one of the pink noise profiles. We'll call it pink noise profile. Then what we do, with our patch, we're going to go ahead and we'll go to the match tool. We're going to play the note that we want to play in the song or whatever, in the project. I'm going to hit record. We're going to stop, and then you can already see, because the target here is selected as the pink noise profile, it's created a EQ curve that adjusts all of our frequencies. And you can kind of see it in the EQ8 down here. We'll take down the amount. It is almost like similar to spectral compression, where it's figuring out what frequencies need to be lowered, what frequencies need to be louder, and then it creates a static EQ curve. I'm actually working on a plug data patch that does the same thing, but as a convolver, so you get really, really high resolution, and it's linear phase. Now, the cool part about Carve EQ, though, is that you can go back into this generated EQ curve, and you can just fix certain aspects. So, for example, I can say, hey, I don't want the sub-region to be attenuated or boosted. So now we're just getting the fixes in the mid and high frequency spectrum. If we take it out, bring it in. And you can really see if you take a look at the EQ8 here and the spectrum right here, it's really flattening it. And that's really cool. The only problem is that once you start changing the sound, I'm going to recommend turning off Carve EQ. Let's bring in a different wavetable. Let's bring down the harmonics of the pitch of the ring mod. Let's pick that. Let's go ahead and go into Carve EQ again. Let's go to the match tool, record. Stop. And then adjust the detail. Turn up the mix. And you can see again, if we turn it off, it has now sort of filled the gaps a little bit. So what we can do is we can once again fix the sub-region. And then what you could do as well is you could have a big change happen in the mid-frequency spectrum like this. Or like that, and you can kind of adjust the curve that it's generated for you. And that can be really useful if you're just trying to do some sort of general smoothing of the curve. So you could lower down the detail and sort of have a more sort of corrective EQ happen. Then smooth out the bottom end. So that's another option. If you don't have a spectral compressor at hand and you're kind of done with a specific sound, you can try Carve EQ. Now, the only problem is, yes, you could also then key track the offset. Exactly. Well, actually, you can't, unfortunately. That was the thing I wanted to mention, is that since this is a static EQ, you can't really change it. Like, you can't really move it up or down. So it's only going to work in a specific scenario where you have either a quick succession of notes where it can record the profile and kind of average it out, or if you have like a one bass patch, right? So I can, for example, go to any other sound like this Marauder style gun bass. And then I can go ahead and bring in a slice EQ. Not a slice EQ, oops, a Carve EQ. But in this case, I don't think it's going to actually find a whole lot of stuff to do. I'm going to record it. And then we're going to pick our pink noise profile. And then we're going to smooth out the low end. And then without it. So you can see how it does that. The only problem is that this is not a dynamic process. You would have to redo it every time. So that can be a little bit annoying. In that case, I still recommend something like a spectral compressor, because that is, once again, dynamic. It always reacts to whatever you're doing. So if we say tilt, let's do tilt -4 as an example. Let's bring in the mix. Turn up the tilt again, turn up the release, turn up the attack, turn on the smoothing a little bit. Turn on the target maybe to kind of I think I went a little bit too low there. Now, once again, this has an OTT in it, so we can probably disable that. And just turn up the compression. Turn up the target here. And if you wanted more dispersion, you could obviously add that with a disperser or anything like that. Now, another cool part about Specom Light too is that you can have it sort of react as different things. So if you have the attack and release all the way down, and the smoothing all the way down, it actually becomes a spectral clipper. So all it's doing now, and in this case, we don't want to use the upwards compression. We just want to use the downwards compression. All it's doing now is clipping down the frequencies. So if we make a flat tilt and we move it up, you can see how gradually we're just clipping the frequencies, pushing them down. If you start turning up the release, you get a limiter. So now you're getting, instead of a clipper, you get a limiter. And then if you turn the attack, you obviously get the compressor. Because you're getting the attack. Let's turn on the tilt again. So yeah, that's Specom Light 2. It's really, really easy to use. Hopefully even easier than the first version or the first versions. I am still wanting to upgrade and Specom to version 2 as well. And I want to do some special things there, like per frequency controls of attack, release, threshold, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Specom Light 2 is simplified to the maximum degree that can be without losing control. Yeah. I clip my nails with a spectral nail clipper. Oh well. So you've got digital fingers then. I can also show, for example, this one heavily relies on a bunch of OTT compression. So I'm going to turn down the compression here. And you can kind of see what OTT does in this case with its frequency response. You get this very specific roll-off towards the high end because of the way the crossovers of the filters of the crossover filters sort of bleeds over frequencies. So in this case, we can take a look at this and think, what can we do to make this mix easier, right? So one of the things I would do is I would just turn the compression up all the way and mimic the sort of range that we had earlier. Then we can start turning up the release, turning down the attack, turning up the smoothing, and then we dial in the compression. Maybe we can even go ahead and turn up the tilt a little bit more to make it a little bit brighter and then turn down the mix. Another option is to actually just have a target threshold that is lower, like this, and then just try upwards or downwards compression and see what happens. Since the sound was already quite full, all we had to do is tame those upper frequencies to not be so bumpy. We can up the target frequency, the target volume, to be less aggressive, and then we can use the makeup gain to just kind of level it for a mix. So now we've just used the downwards compression from Specom Light 2 to get our results on an already compressed sound. That is sort of the thing, because once again, the spectrum is already very, very full, so we don't really have to use upwards compression on this. Other sounds that can benefit from it. Obviously anything sound design, anything sims and etc. A lot of the sounds that I have in my sample packs now already use them anyways. But as an example, we can throw this on a melody loop. Here's an example. I'm going to bring over the slice EQ and the EQA and the plugged out FX. So I'll have a different one here. Do this one, I think. Let's do this one. So let's go ahead and turn off the compression entirely and see what's going on. So we have a real nice slope off towards the high end, but what if we had a more aggressive mix and we wanted it to be closer to pink noise? Well, we'll go with the flat tilt and start bringing up the upwards compression. That's all it needed. I should really change the title, shouldn't I? Is OTT2 free? No, this is sadly not free, but it's pretty cheap. This is a Spectral compressor that has the same philosophy as OTT, which is to squash the signal from above and below a certain volume, but it's doing this with 512 bands, frequency bands, instead of 3. Plus, it's quite intuitive and quite easy to use, specifically because you do get the OTT curve here as an option to kind of mimic the sound of OTT. So if we were to bring this in and bring in some of the downwards compression, so yeah, that's how it sounds on other signals. So whenever you want to make something cleaner and more mixable with other signals, I recommend trying it out. I do have to be a patron to buy this. Well, yeah, it's part of the elite tier, which is $16. And so you can get it once, just subscribe for 1 month, and then you essentially just unsubscribe if you want to, and then just keep using the zip that you download forever until perhaps it's not backwards compatible. But the idea that I had was that when plug data the next plug data comes out with the store, I would give you a license essentially, that, or like a code that you can put into your plug data account, and then you get all of my patches and onto your account with the updates and stuff. You should compile it with Juice and rack up a bigger bag. The problem is that time, sanity, and maintenance, right? Is once I start doing multiple VST plugins, not only will I not be able to make music anymore, but I'm going to be maintaining all of them because they're sort of, you know, closed source binaries that you have to recompile and re-sign and all that kind of stuff, especially if Apple decides to do another update and break everything. So them being part of Plugged Out as a system, I find to be much easier for maintenance, and I can focus on just actually fixing stuff and improving stuff instead of having to deal with the hellscape that is C++. You start becoming tech support, yes. One juice UI code versus 100 min. Basically, yeah. And Plug Data will actually be getting SVG support in the next update. So you're going to be able to use vector graphics. And hopefully, and I'm still working with the developer on that, we can add a real-time filter support like in Figma. So you can get dynamic UI with changing shading and lighting and stuff. Same in the Max for Life instruments, yes. But yeah, so you can basically use it anywhere, even on some like of my older samples. It's still quite useful. If I load up, for example, one of the very, very first bass patterns of mine. Like this one's super old. This is like 3 years old by now. And you can even see if I compare it to one of the new ones, how this frequency spectrum looks. Just take a look at... Let's load up the first one. Yeah, sure. So take a look at the frequency spectrums of these two sounds. This is 3 years old. The other one is fairly recent, like 2 months. Something familiar, right? Look at the high frequencies here. Now, the new one. So what spectral compression is really about is just maximizing the loudness by having everything spectrally maxed, right? Your frequency maxing, essentially, with spectral compression. You're not doing that through like destructive methods like saturation or layering or anything like that. You're really getting the most out of the one sound. And it makes it a lot easier to mix because you don't have to juggle so many different sounds to mix. Now, I can still go to this old preset and this old sample and fix it up with Specom. The problem is that when you use Specom as a band-aid for something that has already been compressed, especially with OTT, you're fixing it by adding even more compression. So what I always recommend is to use this in the synthesis or sound design stage or on sounds that are sort of not very compressed, right? Now, you can obviously lower the amount of compression by having a high release and a high smoothing amount. That helps a ton, and especially the smoothing helps a ton. So if I just go ahead and set this up to be just the default settings, let's see what that does on the old bass pattern. So now it's nice and flat. Let's make it louder. But as you can tell, as I said, since this was already compressed with OTT, we're getting even more compression. So we have to do something about that. I'm going to roll back the attack. I'm going to turn up the smoothing, and then I'm going to drastically turn up the release. And now, perhaps as well, I'm going to grab the downwards compression and lower that a little bit. Mix off. Let's make it a tiny bit brighter. So now it's a lot closer to the other bass pattern. And the funny thing is if I dry wet this with the other pattern, there's not much of a difference, huh? So you can tell that I've basically maximized the amount of spectrum dynamics that I can get out of these sounds. And a lot of the new sample bass patterns and samples that I have or use spectral compression is because that's the best way to get one sound to be as maxed out as it can be without losing the character, without adding anything destructive. So yeah, that's why I'm really excited about Specom Light 2. I won't be touching this for a bit. I had one more idea, which was right now, as you can see, if you hover over the target, the curve, and the tilt, you'll see the representation of it, a rough estimate of it in the UI. But this is only an approximation, so I find it's only really good as a visual clue. But I had an idea as a sort of a post-launch update to give you the option to maybe shift-click the curve icon so that this line basically stays. when you hover away from it. But I thought, you know, maybe it's not necessary. Maybe it's really not necessary. Because honestly, it's just an approximation. It just roughly shows you what it looks like. It's not actually, this particular visualization is not accurate down to the 0.dB. Another cool thing that you can, for example, do is to, and I usually don't recommend using flat noise tilts because they're very aggressive on the ears. Could you try Audacity 2 on some dry vocals with subtle parallel mixing? Yes, I'll show you in a second. One more thing you can do is you can pull up the high frequencies and just use it as a parallel sort of, as a parallel frequency boost. So if I do that, we're adding a lot of the higher frequencies and we're sort of flattening it a little bit and giving it a bit more of a higher tilt. Which can be quite nice as well. So you can do some parallel mixing there, parallel compression if you want. I do have a vocal. I'll have to quickly check where that is. Return projects. There we go. Samples recorded. It's probably this one. Yeah. But I think that one's already processed, so I don't know if I have a non-processed version. Probably not. That's also processed. I'm not sure why I would have an unprocessed version. That would be kind of weird. But I'll check. Well, there's one that's 4 megabytes. No. So I'll grab the processed version, right? This is already well compressed, so it won't really do much, but you can kind of get an idea, I guess. So let me go ahead and reset this to regular settings. Your silhouette in the skies. I'll go here. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. I'll wait for you or I won't survive. That's without any spec comp, essentially. No gravity to I'll bring it in. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. I'll wait for you or I won't survive. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn up the target volume. No gravity to hold me. I'm going to turn up the smoothing a lot. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. I'll wait for you or I won't survive. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. And then I'm going to turn down the upwards compression. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. I'll wait for you or I won't survive. Somewhere else. You keep on moving, doubting yourself. Perhaps you only want to do downwards compression in this case. Else. You keep on moving, doubting yourself. Our choices made. Can you feel? Somewhere else. You keep on moving, doubting yourself. Somewhere else. You keep on moving, doubting yourself. So on vocal content, it's still too aggressive. Usually the problem there is that you can tell compression on vocals oftentimes because we're very, very good at telling how compression sounds on vocal specifically, or any kind of effect on a vocal. You can really tell what's happening. In this case, yeah, the spectral compression is a bit too aggressive. You won't really find many compressors that'll do a good job on vocals because vocals need really, really like subtle amounts of compression. Our choices made. Can you feel your silhouette in the skies? Your silhouette in the skies. Maybe with these settings, it can kind of work. Silhouette in the skies. No gravity to hold me or keep me alive. I'll wait for you or I won't survive. But then again, I think this vocal had been processed already with spec comp already. So yeah, I would have to grab some kind of unprocessed vocal, which I don't have laying around, unfortunately. But I do have, for example, a piano. So some really soft piano. I'm going to load in Specom Light, and I'm going to put that on there. So this is without it. Oh yeah, you could absolutely use it for a pre-drop vocal. Yeah. Let's compare that to OTT. I'm going to bring in OTT here. We can turn on the release. Turn up the at-once compression. So here's the max that we can do in OTT. And then this would be the max in Specom Light. Oh, you want to have like a spectrally compressed ASMR. I see. I see. And we can use this even on pads, for example. I have this pad right here. So it just completely maximizes everything. We can check OTT. That's OTT. One thing that people can do to kind of help OTT work a little bit better is to turn up the crossover. But once again, it's never going to get as surgical. Yeah, you can think of it similarly to Unfilter, right? Where it's essentially maximizing the spectrum. I'm not sure if Unfilter is real time. It might be, but what's really important about spectral compressors is that they're low resolution, low latency, easy to use, and most importantly, CPU efficient. So what we can do is we can check out the CPU usage of Specom Light, because I haven't shown that on stream. I'm not sure how much of a bias there is because I'm streaming, right? So that's going to have an impact on this. So let me bring in a melody loop. So right now I'm streaming on YouTube, right? And I do have Edge open, which I can actually close. That doesn't need to be open. So the way Specom Light and most of my plug data patches work is that when the UI is open, it's doing some extra things to visualize you stuff, and that can be a little bit CPU taxing. It's usually not a lot, but it can be there. So when you minimize the plugin, you can see the CPU percentage drop by 1%. What then happens is that if you stop playing and there's no more audio happening, the patch actually goes to sleep. So one thing I can do is to help kind of lower the noise floor for the CPU is to increase the buffer size. I set that to 1024. And that should help lower the CPU a little bit more. We can even go up to 2048 just in case, because we are currently streaming and that puts a strain on the CPU. So now setting it to 2048, you can see with Specom Light on, minimized, right? Just processing, we're getting 1% CPU usage. about it, 0%, right? If we open up Specom Light 2, getting between 1 and 2%. Actually, pretty much 2 at this point. Minimize it, goes back to 1%. Stop playing the audio, bam, goes to sleep, right? OTT is very well optimized. Since it's inside of Ableton, it is very, very well optimized. Let's see how much that uses. %. Stop playing it, see if the CPU usage drops. Yes, it does. So OTT also auto sleeps. But this is really important, right? So Specom Light 2 is pretty much as efficient as OTT. So you can use it, you can sprinkle it on everything like salt, essentially. It's not actually OTT 2. Yeah, it's just a clickbaity title. I'll probably change that after. But yeah, it's been a long time coming in terms of getting Specom Light to be this optimized. It uses about 21.3 milliseconds of latency. That's because of the FFT nature of the compressor. So you're going to have a little bit of latency, but if you only use 1 instance per channel, you should be good. That will only add an overall 20 milliseconds of latency to your project. Yes, 1% of 1 core. Yeah. We can even start duplicating this. Let's duplicate it 4 times. So we're using 4% roughly. And then we're dropping down to 1% because there's a little bit of overhead with running plug data, just by default. Let's go ahead and use 4 OTTs. And then there we can see that OTT is just a little bit more CPU efficient. But here as well, is it going to drop all the way down? Yes. Okay, so at least OTT goes all the way to sleep. Yeah, so you can see the performance is very, very close between the two. And that was a huge goal of mine. That was totally not the case when the first version of Specom Light came out. I did a bunch of things in plug data that weren't very efficient, and this version does everything as efficiently as it can be. And we can even set a curve in here that resembles the OTT curve. So yeah, now you essentially get OTT with 512 bands and its linear phase, which is really, really cool. I've already shown a few sound design examples, but I do have Serum installed, so I could maybe make a sound in there and we can kind of listen to it. So right here, this is just the first Serum though. Everyone's using Serum 2 now. I actually would have to install it real quick. 1 second. I haven't installed it yet on this computer. Yeah, Serum 1 looks so ancient now, doesn't it? I am installing Serum 2 right now. I only have Serum installed because of backwards compatibility with older projects, as you know. The same will have to be for Soothe 2, unfortunately, because of I-Lok. I'm going to go ahead and rescan in Ableton real quick, and that should be all. I don't think I need to activate. Okay. Oh, it has to open the browser. All right, that works. Authorization successful. Okay, cool. Thank you. We're back. I think I actually have some presets in here. We do. I-Lok cursed. Yes, very much so. Let's throw a Specom Light on this. check out the EQ down here. I wish you could have Spectrum as a pop out window. I'm gonna grab Slice EQ so you can see that too. I'm gonna turn on the UI scale so I can make it even smaller. So in this case, because we have, I think, 3 OTTs in here, we can disable 2 of them. We won't need them. So you can see in this case, we can actually just get rid of 2 of our OTTs and only use 1, and then use Specom Light. And we'll be even more efficient when it comes to sound designing. I have a few more presets in here. I have I think I have a clip in here. Pretty old patch right here. What is it called? Flanges, are you friends when there's... Oh, the flanges right here. Then we have the boat bass. Oh yeah, this one was pretty cool. So this particular sound is very dependent on the flanger. Oops, that sounds very weird. Let me go ahead and put the envelope on that. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Was it keep playing that? That's so strange. So So what's happening here is I'm doing a technique that I did in Massive, where you grab a wavetable and then you just pitch it up with a frequency shifter to the point where the fundamental in the wavetable actually becomes your formant, and everything else on top becomes essentially the overtones. You can actually do this in Phaseplant too, by just grabbing a wavetable with a consistent sub. Oops, that was weird. Right, because those are samples. So let's grab a complex wavetable here. That was very loud, sorry. And then what you do is you just grab a frequency shifter. So you could either shift here, or you could do it the regular method, but just grabbing frequency shifter. The only problem there is that it's not really key tracked. So even if I grabbed a key tracking. It's because frequency shifters are linear in terms of how they shift, so it's really difficult to make that work. What the fuck does OTT2 have compared to OTT1? It's so funny that OTT is like such a cultural thing. So OTT2 is not actually called OTT2. It's basically any kind of spectral compressor, because spectral compressors are essentially what OTT can do, but with hundreds more bands than OTT1. OTT1 is a very classical approach in terms of doing regular filters, doing crossovers, and then doing upwards and downwards compression, where multiband compressors, specifically like Specom Light 2, use an FFT process, which is used to, for example, visualize your EQ equalizers, your spectrum equalizers. So it uses that system to then compress the spectrum. And in that case, you get a lot more bands. yes, it is actually linear phase. It doesn't introduce any phase shifting. That's the great part. It has no phase shifting. It's entirely linear in its process. So I can show you, for example, on this little melody loops. Take a look at the spectrum down here on the EQ8. We'll bring up the Specom Light. Look at all of the energy that we're getting. And we can completely mix it in because it's a linear phase process. This is called Specom Light 2, which is essentially a patch within a plugin that is called Plug Data. Plug Data is, think of it like your Max for Live or your Native Instruments Reactor, but it's a VST. So it's free and open source, but people can essentially make their own patches in it, and then they will kind of work like plugins, basically. And this is Specom Light 2. So this is actually the second version of the first one, which was sort of this this very experimental spectral compressor. Now I've revamped it to be version 2, and it's a lot simpler to use. Basically, most of the time, all you have to do is load up Plug Data effects, which will look like this. Then you'll have your Specom Light 2 inside here. When you've downloaded the zip file and extracted the folder somewhere, you can hit open patch and then just find the patch and open it. And then it'll be inside your recently opened. You click that, it loads as a plugin, essentially. And now you can start compressing. And the idea there is that it's a lot more accurate than what OTT can do, because it's not so in terms of OTT, it's a free band compressor, right? So you have 3 different frequency regions that are being compressed, and it's rather broad. So if there's a lot of mid frequencies, you'll maybe need 2 or 3 OTTs for the entire spectrum to be really flattened. With Specom Light, you essentially just need 1 instance and you'll have it completely flattened. So in this case, for example, these are some nice settings that just kind of add more energy to the sample. But I can take down the attack, the release, and the smoothing, and you can see just how aggressive the compression can be, to the point where it just sounds like noise. I can add release, and I can add smoothing, and attack. So a lot of other patches that you would usually use, like in my case, I have a lot of Phaseplant patches that utilize OTT or some form of multiband compression. To get a lot of the volume out of it. For example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I think it's like 4 or 5 in here. You see a bunch of OTTs. I can disable most of them. I may have to keep 1 or 2 in this case, but the rest can be done by Specom Light. Perhaps we can deactivate even 1 more. Yes. I don't think we can deactivate the very first one because OTT has its own sound. So sometimes for this kind of sound design, you want a little bit of those OTT artifacts. But from what I can tell you is Specom Light can do up to 100 decibels of upwards compression. So imagine you have a sound coming in that is very quiet. So you turn it up, right? That's essentially what compression does. Most compressors will limit you to like 30 dBs of compression or 70 dBs. Specom Light 2 limits you to 100 dB. So that is a lot of gain. So if a frequency is very, very quiet, it can push it up 100 dBs to get it to the maximum that you want it to be. that's essentially OTT2, right? Because it's iterative upon what OTT1 was, which was this sort of simplified free-band, multi-band compressor, where the goal was to flatten the spectrum, and then spectral compression is really just the next level of it. And it's also linear phase, which is great. But yeah, let me go back to this this particular sound, which is not coming through because it's not selected. Yeah, so the idea is that you grab some kind of sub frequency, maybe we'll send it to lane 3, and we'll have some kind of a volume shaping happening on this. So I'll do it like this. So you can see how now we're suddenly getting, with the frequency shifter, because of the sub frequency, we're getting like this overtone and then all of the upper harmonics. The only problem is right now, it is not key tracked. So we could try doing this with the frequency shifter in... Well, that sounds pretty bad. So the frequency shifter here has a certain tone to it, because it's linear. Then what we can do is we can just... I'm going to go ahead and add a band reject filter. So that's going to be in special band reject. And I'm going to go ahead and modulate it like this. I'm going to take the width, do negative. And move that up. Once again, you kind of want to move around the formant with the frequency shifter. And now we're just using a wavetable to create that sort of bass sound. So what we can do then is morph through the wavetable. And now we're still retaining that formant, but we're changing all of the overtones. And this was something you could do in Massive, which is crazy to me. That's honestly kind of a game changer for post-processing. Do you give sound design one-on-one lessons? I used to, under a special tier on my Patreon, but I do not at the moment, just simply because I don't have the bandwidth / the time for it. Will it be included with the Patreon subscription? Yes, it's part of the elite tier. So that's the $16 tier. So $16 a month, essentially. You can subscribe for 1 month, get all the content that you want, and then unsubscribe, so you don't have to be subscribed or stay subscribed. Another thing we can do after this frequency shifter is actually to grab the comp filter again. So I'm going to go ahead and do a squarify on this. Oh, look, that sounds so sick. So now we're getting best of both worlds, where we're getting this really cool formant, and we're getting all the cool overtones from the wavetable. The only problem, as you can tell, once again, it doesn't really key track, so it doesn't really work that way. But you're getting a ton of really, really cool sounds. Let's go ahead and grab an LFO here and move through the flanger. Oh, that's nuts. You can probably tighten up the gain here a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and... But you can see there's a huge gap between the sub and the first harmonic, so maybe we can add a little bit of distortion to the sub. Maybe also modulate the gain a little bit. what's so fun is that, once again, I don't really have to think about mixing this, right? Like, I don't have to mix this. This is already kind of mixed because the Spectral compressor makes sure that all the little dips and peaks that I have in the sound, even in the synthesis stage, all get flattened. So this is this how you made the bass flow samples? I think the ones in bundle volume 2, no. I think these are just still there. These are just still regular processing, and I think you'll also be able to see it if you just take a look at the spectrum. You can see usually when you see that slope down and that hill sort of at around 3 kilohertz, around this area, when there's a hill like that, you know I've used OTT, basically. And any samples that don't have that, like I think I started really exploring spectral compression as after the second bundle, like this one, for example. And here I was actually, yeah, it was quite aggressive with the curve. So you can see quite aggressive, but you can really see why I started using spectral compression. And these were, I think, using a spectral compressor that I did in Max for Live, but that one was very noisy. So I didn't quite understand how to make them smooth back then. Let me load up a few more. I think starting here, that's why I started actually using sort of the smoothing as well. You can really see it here, like it's quite nicely sloped off. Yeah, that one's nuts. Still one of my favorite bass patterns. So if I were to go, for example, into Serum 2, and I were to make one of those sounds, it would be so fast now, because all I have to do is grab Serum 2, grab Specom Light, turn it up all the way, maybe like 96%, turn up the release and the smoothing, and then I can start essentially sound designing. I'm going to have it at -12, the target volume. And then I'm going to go in here. Let's go wavetable for the bass right here. I'm going to grab a complex and move through the wavetable. And then I'm going to go in here and enable So I'm going to bring over the EQ here again, and I'm going to bring on the slice EQ so you can see what it's doing to the spectrum. I'm going to play it again. So watch it. That's about it. Go global, done. Let's bring in a additive wavetable to get some cool overtones. Let's do some ring modulation from the first oscillator. And let's bring in let's lower the general. Let's also go in here and set the velocity to be low, so we can then change the yeah, we can change the hold to be lower, and then velocity goes up here. Something's wrong. I think, yeah, only this is supposed to play. Let's actually send this to high pass. Then what I want to bring in is a band reject filter. I'll send both of these through that filter. So this is without it. Hello, you can get it on my Patreon. So what this is essentially a plug data patch, where plug data is something similar to, think of it like Patcher, but more like Max for Live, but as a VST. So it's a VST-free clap, whatever. And you can install it on any DAW. So you can use patches from other people in any DAW. In this case, obviously, as well as FL Studio. And what Specom Light 2 is essentially, think of it like OTT, but instead of having free bands, like free frequency bands, you have 512. And not only that, but all of those frequency bands are also linear phase. So something that is usually hard to obtain with something like OTT. That is kind of part of the Spectral compressor, where you have 512 bands, where the lower frequency bands are a little bit broader. And then when you get to the higher frequencies, you get more and more bands essentially distributed over there. So it's really, really good at bringing up frequencies from the bottom, and it's really good at really maximizing your spectrum and essentially making mixing easier, because what you're doing is you're forcing whatever sound that you have to be at its maximum frequency wise. So as an example, if I have a melody loop right here that is rather mellow, so I'm going to take down the compression. I can even make it a little bit more aggressive even. I'm going to take a low pass filter. So let's say you had that and you're working with that, right? And now you have a very energetic mix, like say future bass or whatever. And then you can take something like spectral compression to really push up everything without having to deal with multiband crossovers, cutoff frequencies, whatever. It's pulling out all of that information using using spectral compression. And it's basically the same technique that actually any equalizer uses or any spectrum analyzer uses, where it's splitting it into a bunch of linear phase bands. But in this case, I'm actually using it to compress the signal rather than just visualize your spectrum. You get a couple of curve presets. So you have the flat tilt. So you have a dB tilt. So you can see me actively tilting this. You have a slope tilt, which is a little bit nicer for softer material. And then you have sort of an OTT style curve. And just to kind of visualize in the head, Specom Light 2 lets you upwards compress frequencies up to 100 decibels. So if you have a frequency somewhere in your high frequencies and it's really, really quiet, say like minus 80 dB, it can compress it up to 0 if you wanted to. Right now, most spectral compressors are rather noisy, so they're not very usable. Specom Light 2 uses a really good smoothing algorithm to make it sound more similar to something like multiband compression. So if I set the attack, release, and smoothing all the way down, it sounds very noisy. And if I change the tilt and if I take the compression down, so it's the combination of all of these other methods that you add to spectral compression to make it sound more like really, really good multiband compression. Because oftentimes you can get a lot out of multiband compression, but you really have to know your stuff, right? You really have to know how to set the crossovers and how much upwards or downwards compression to do in certain cases. Whereas with spectral compression, you have so many frequency bands that it kind of becomes negligible. But what's really important is that you have a good smoothing algorithm, an averaging algorithm, and attack and release controls, of course. Do you still do private lessons? Not at the moment. I sadly don't have the bandwidth. Like, I literally just don't have the time. But if I do, it'll be another tier on the Patreon. So you can see just by me turning up the compression to 100%, is this melody loop is so full spectrum and so high energy that you don't really have to like layer it with much anymore, right? And that is sort of the idea, is that you can get more out of your sims and more out of your sounds without having to like resort to layering or distortion to get more harmonics. I appreciate that. So in this case, I have this just like really simple Serum 2 patch. And this is without Specom Light. And you can kind of hear how, in this case, the wavetable is actually already nicely full. Like all the frequencies here are already kind of processed to be full. But if we start adding a bunch of filtering, a bunch of movement, we can still get a full spectrum to work with. That's so much easier to mix, right? If your signals are already full and maxed out, and you can call it frequency maxed, then they're much easier to mix. So now the cool part is because I don't rely on, you can obviously get a lot of sounds through like creative effects, right? A certain effects chain that has a certain sound. And then it doesn't matter so much what you're actually putting into that effects chain. If you change the wavetable or whatever, oftentimes then the results can be quite similar. But if you use something like spectral compression, what it does is it allows you to maximize the spectrum, whatever you do. So then you can get really creative with your wavetables. You can do really like weird wavetables that you usually wouldn't use because they don't really fit the sort of energy that you're trying to go for. But with Specom Light 2, and I know the title of the live stream is a little bit clickbaity. With Spectral Light 2, it kind of enables you to do that, similar to how OTT used to do that, but not quite, right? Like with OTT, you always have to go back in with an EQ and kind of fix it. Now, can you compare this with a normal OTT real quick if you haven't already? Yes, of course. So let me play this. So that's your regular OTT. That's better. So what you can usually observe with OTT is that it has this slope. It goes down, right? The higher you go in the frequencies, the more it slopes downwards. And that's just because of the nature of being free bands. Whereas Specom Light 2 actually stays. It's very consistent with the frequency spectrum. So you get the tilt that you want, essentially. Now you can kind of imitate it by using the OTT curve. Still, it's generally speaking going to be more aggressive. And then you can also use the sloped curve. And you can kind of slope down the spectrum similarly to OTT. Actually, we have both active right now, that's why. And what's really fun about Specom Light 2 is that the OTT curve in here is actually recorded. I grabbed white noise and put OTT on it, and then I recorded the result of that, because white noise is essentially flat, right? Like all of the frequencies in white noise are basically the same volume. I think actually in my case it was a saw wave that was flat. Put OTT on it, and then I got the exact curve that OTT would have on white noise, essentially, or like a sort of a flat signal, right? A frequency spectrum that is flat, which is kind of the median, because oftentimes you have frequencies or sounds coming in that have really high frequencies here and then low frequencies there. So it all kind of averages out to white noise, essentially. So I recorded that as a frequency response curve, a threshold curve, and then I smoothed it out a little bit because it was a bit too aggressive, and then it's part of Specom Light. So you can still have that sort of strong sub bump that you get from OTT using this curve. Yeah. Noob OTT Pro and Specom. God. I went over his Patreon and don't see it yet. What don't you see? Yeah, I thought it was actual OTT too, because of the Serum 2 release. But this is even better. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. It is also very efficient. I made sure that this thing auto sleeps. So if there's no sound coming through, then it's going to go to sleep and it's not going to use any CPU. And it's actually just slightly more CPU heavy than regular OTT. Like 0.02 or like 0.1 more percentage CPU. So they roughly use the same amount, funnily enough. Will there be an install guide on the Patreon? Yes, there's an install guide. It's quite easy, really. It's like all you do is you download the zip file, extract the folder somewhere where you want to keep it and not really mess with it, because it's really important that it stays somewhere. And then you open up Plug Data, you install Plug Data, which is free, and open up Plug Data Effects, hit Open Patch, and then you find the folder. In this case, it's I have all of my Plug Data patches here, and then you'll find Specom Light 2. You'll see the PD file, hit open, and bam, you're ready to go. The next time you want to load it, it's really simple. You load up Plug Data Effects again, and then you'll have it right here. You can even favorite it. Whoops. You can favorite it right here, so it'll pop up as the first thing. And it automatically goes into plugin mode, and then you can just kind of use it as a plugin. What's really important is that you keep the folder where it is, and you don't change the location of it, so that you don't have anything breaking in other projects and stuff. The next update for Plug Data will have that fixed by having a library in itself sort of built in. For the hissing in the top end, it's creating what you typically use a EQ or use something like Sooth to clean that up. The hissing is actually just like noise, right? It's noise from the wavetable. It's essentially the noise floor. We're not very used to to multiband compressors being able to pull it up so much because they're not high resolution enough to do that. So often in that case, you can use a lot of the smoothing in Specom Light or the release. Another thing that you can always do is, depending on your mix down, you can still grab an EQ afterwards and kind of just, you know, add some smooth slopes or whatever you want. But yeah, generally speaking, Specom Light is very true to what it does, right? So if you have a target curve that starts at 0 dB, your sub-frequency region is going to be at 0, and then everything else tilts down to -3 per octave across the spectrum. If I turn down the sound, you can kind of see it. So if I load the EQ8 over here, right over here, I'm going to have to turn up the compression, of course. I think I have a second one here. Let me delete this one. Yeah, we have to obviously do this one. So let me go flat, turn up the dB. So if I load up a spectrum right here, an Ableton Spectrum, you can see that the sub-frequency here is hitting 0 dB. And that's our target volume. So if I turn the tilt up to 0 dB, all the frequencies will be hitting 0. I'm going to turn this down a lot. So you can see right now, everything is sort of going to hit 0 dB, but obviously you want a tilt, you want it to be closer to something like pink noise. So then you add that tilt and you can go down to like brown noise, which is pretty extreme, right? And you can see how like surgical this compression is. You just can't get that through regular multiband compression. It's not possible. And then you can smooth it a lot. Now let's make this sound a little bit bigger. So I'm going to add I'm going to remove the filter. I'm going to add a little bit of hyper dimension. I'm going to add some distortion. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an equalizer here. So I can actually get quite creative with the compression. Whereas without the compressor, you'd have that huge peak right there. That would make it a lot harder to use, right? If you used OTT on this, that peak doesn't really get solved. It's still there. With a spectral compression, it's much better addressed. Now I wanted to add the filter, and I wanted to add the diffuser. And now we can just go back in and go crazy. I'm going to switch this high pass filter, this tube distortion to a low pass filter. I'm going to enable this here. Yeah, so just 2 wavetables, a bit of filtering. We can maybe cheat a little bit and use a sample here as well for the transient. So I'm going to go in and bring in one of those bass transients right here. I'm going to try and see if we can maybe send that direct out. Maybe that'll do. Make it a one-shot. Maybe we can add a little bit of an attack to this, though. I think. We have to enable the clip right here. We can probably even go. So that's about it. Let me go ahead and pick the OTT preset. Yeah, so you can hear that sub is a little bit louder. Now, what we can do is probably switch this to Spectral. And now what I want to do is I want to switch this to, I think it was scan to manual. I'm going to bring in something like that. And then I'm going to be using the spectral gate. I'm going to remove the sub. And then I'm going to scan through the spectral oscillator. I probably have to use the detune or the shifter here. Where's the shift? And then we're moving too much. Oh, let's turn on the phase locking and transients. And then probably turn on the distortion. Because I know this is usually very loud. So you can see with the release, I can make it super aggressive because the upwards and downwards compressor essentially isn't so like light on the dynamics of the signal. So it can get super hard with this. I'm not quite liking the results of the spectral oscillator though. There we go. Now we're getting cool results. What's the tilt OGT preset exactly? I don't fully understand what why the tilt is so important. Right. So the tilt. OGT. I really need to change the title. The tilt is important because oftentimes we don't want to compress things towards or EQ things towards white noise. White noise, generally speaking, is too aggressive on the ears. So what you want to go for is usually that -3 dB per octave slope. He's lying. And so it's really important because sometimes you have a track that is brighter. Sometimes you have a track that is sort of warmer, right? Or like darker, you could say. So it depends on how energetic the track is. Sometimes you want a -4 dB slope, or like a 3 dB slope. Sometimes something super aggressive like a 2 dB. So you want to have control over that tilt. Now, most multiband compressors don't give you an easy time doing that. Or spectral compressors, because they're so surgical, let you essentially tilt the frequency spectrum. So right now I can go back to the flat one, and I can tilt this down to -6. So you can really see in the spectrum here how we're getting this line, and the sound is quite warm in this case, right? It's quite nice in the ears. The brighter we make it, the more energetic it gets. Now, you don't want to go to white noise because white noise is very aggressive. So you usually want to hit for something like -3 to -6. Okay, that's pretty sick. In this case, I would probably also send a direct sub out, just in case. And then we'll probably remove the diffuser. And I'm going to add one of my other plug data patches, which is Iris. Right here. I can do a bunch of fun stuff in plug data, like you can see. This is really interesting UI. That's why you're able to change the FFT size. Also, the UI is phenomenal. Thank you so much. No, you cannot change the FFT size. And the reason for that is because 1024 FFT is actually the perfect sort of middle ground. Anything higher or lower, generally speaking, what will happen is it'll become less accurate in terms of time information. If you go lower, of course, then you don't have enough bands. And 1024 was actually sort of the best sort of distribution, also latency-wise, right? Yeah, so this is actually 512. So it's 512 bands, but it's a 1024 FFT. As you said, because of the lower band distribution, the lower bands are actually like less aggressive on the compression. And that's why the 1024 FFT is actually the best. It has the best sort of middle ground, which is really interesting that it happened to be exactly that number. You can get it on my Patreon. It's under the Elite tier, which is $16. Yeah, so it's that perfect size, basically. Oh, now we're getting cool sounds. Okay. Let's go to some of the mangled ones. there a way to set the spectral oscillator to be mono? Is that at all possible? Oh, that one sounds weird. Oh, that one's sick. So that's without Specom. Ever thought about making a decay spectral EQ? Basically increasing the gain increases the decay of specific frequencies and vice versa. Looking for a plugin but never seen. Oh, that's an interesting idea. So you essentially decay. The louder a frequency is, the more it decays. So like a spectral EQ, but that is based on spectral delay, but based on the amplitude. Could be interesting, yeah. It would have to be very high resolution though, so that it doesn't ring out a bunch of frequencies. Maybe route it to a lane and set it to mono. That's an idea, but I wanted to go through the filter too. That makes it a bit difficult. I mean, width. Ah, that doesn't work, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm gonna just use a regular wavetable because I have more control over the harmonics. But yeah, there's so much fun stuff you can do in Serum 2. But once again, I would like to stay in Phaseplant. I'm going to show you some cool sounds in there as well, just to compensate. So I'm going to grab a wavetable. I'm going to go to these wavetables, grab a mangled one. We'll literally just like make something similar, but we'll kind of go a little bit crazy. Let's grab an LFO. That's all right. I'm already done. Take a free. Ooh, wait, let's put it. Let's add another wavetable. Let's grab a additive one. That'll be in here, additive. So that's just with 2 wavetables. Let's remove the low end and then band limit this. I wonder what would happen if we did this one, but like over a longer time, so a longer period. Let's go ahead and ring mod this a little bit. Yeah, but the delays, but increasing or decreasing the quay is quite different. Let's use the same one though. I'm gonna get rid of this. We can also distort this a little bit, so we get a little bit more consistent harmonics. Now, if we wanted to do a bit of a different sound there, we can go ahead and make it slow again. I want to grab the multipass because I don't want to affect the low end. I want to grab filter table and want to do some movement there as well. Through the wavetable, I'm going to pick my favorite one, which is fake unison. Infinite. We may have to also like kind of so good, so good. Add a little bit of stereo to, oh yeah, and let's not add stereo there, but here. Put it back to minimum. I don't know why these are not synced. That's a bit strange. Probably because, let's put this to 1. Or let's make it always trigger from node on, always trigger from node on. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, that's sick. Let's make it free, and I'm going to go ahead and map the wavetable position to a macro so that we can go crazy with this. I'm going to move this here. Yeah, that's nuts. The really cool part about Specom Light in this as well is that it's keeping all of those crazy harmonics from the filter table intact. So if I were to disable it, it would get really loud. Really loud harmonics peaking at, but now we don't, which is great. We can add maybe one little trick to add a semitone. Let's add a phaser on... Well, we don't have noise here. Yeah, this is wild stuff you can do in Phaseplant. It's just so fun because everything just stays intact, right? No, OTT is not really out. Damn, I really need to change the title. But something similar to it might be out, which is called Spectral Compression. Particularly this is Specom Light 2, which is a spectral compressor. So think of it like something like OTT, but it uses 512 frequency bands instead of 3, and they're all linear phase. So you get a lot more potential out of a sound compared to OTT, which is sort of taking the classical approach, which is to have minimum phase crossover filters, and then you have 3 of them, right, at specific frequency regions, where that is just not enough to really get the most out of your sound. So spectral compression is the way to go. So as an example, if I were to compare OTT, that's OTT. Without OTT. With OTT. And then Specom Light. Oh yeah, we can add one more cool thing, which is a gain hover. So we'll just do minus. Actually, no, we don't need to do that. We can just use ring mod. We'll do like that. But that is still too fast. So instead, we're going to set this to be sideband, and then we're going to have the rectify up. I'm going to grab a sine wave and send that to sideband, and then have just a shift. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. I have a other bunch of really cool little presets that I've made, but I don't quite remember. Let's see. Oh yeah, that was the one from the This Could Be Us remix. This one is so sick. I'm gonna disable Specom Light because I don't think it needs to be on there. Oh no, it does, yeah. So this is one of the basses I did in my Virtual This Could Be Us remix. So without any post-processing compression, it sounds like that. And then you use the Specom Light, and you get that. And then with OTT, you get this. So there's still a lot to do in terms of fixing the frequency spectrum. In this case, you could probably have to do some EQing. And then Specom Light 2. Completely full and ready to use. Yeah, it's so sick. It's so sick. Sweet. I think that was enough, kind of a showcase. I've showed off the Phaseplant demo. I'll probably be playing that again on the outro of the stream. But I thought Specom Light 2 was such a big deal that I had to kind of make a stream about it. I will be changing the title though, because I don't want to clickbait too many people. Because right now anyone can come in and like get an explanation, right? But if someone watches the VOD and they're like, it takes like an hour for me to explain why it's not called OTT2, yeah, it's going to cause a bit of confusion. What is the main purpose of the Spectrum stock plugin? The other one down here in Ableton. Such an insane sound. I think the reason why it sounds the way it does is because of this harmonic right here. Setting this sine wave to be 32 harmonic off. If I set it to just 7, well, actually it still has that movement. Then it's something else. What is it? Where is that coming from? Oh, it's the wavetable, actually. Yeah, it's the wavetable. The wavetable has a little bit of movement there. But still. That's a lot of distortion. But yeah. That is and Specom Light 2. I'm going to be continue to use this. It is pretty much done. I don't think I'm going to be doing many more updates to it because the way it is right now is somewhat perfect, since the first version has been around for a long time and I've just been kind of continuously improving it. And I found that this final UI update is kind of just it, right? Maybe at some point I'll be doing an update, moving it all to SVG and like vector graphics, so I can scale this freely. Yeah, spectral compression without downwards compression is the way to go. Yes, it's so good, so useful, because essentially what you're doing is you're leaving all the loud harmonics intact, and you're just pushing up everything that is below up. So I think we can even do this with this preset. If I bring this down and I just use the upwards compression, so now we're just pushing up what's below the threshold. I can probably push this even further. But maybe compressing the upper harmonics a little bit. Like a little bit. Wouldn't Vector be a pain to edit in plug data? At the moment, yes, but the next update is going to have native SVG support. So you can bring in vector graphics and just kind of have them work. You can rotate them. It's going to be a bit of a setup, but it's going to be worth it, because then your UI is completely free to be resized. But yeah, besides that, I hope this stream was informational. I will be changing the title because I just don't want to rage bait anyone. But to anyone who was part of the stream, thank you so much for sticking around and watching me kind of show you OTT 2.0, I guess you could say. Besides that, do check out the Phaseplant only project file if you have Ableton Live 12. Yeah, besides that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I do have one more thing to say before I go. I had the idea of doing production, sort of like a producer lounge sort of thing on my Discord server, where maybe every Sunday or every specific day of the week, I'll have a bunch of VC channels where people can just kind of join and just produce, share their screens, and just kind of, you know, hang around and kind of inspire each other. Because oftentimes, unless you're in LA, Los Angeles, you don't really get to have those kinds of environments. Yeah, I do have I think you can find it on the Patreon too. I think there's a link to it, but I'll probably throw up a Discord link in the chat here in a second as well. Will it be available as a VST purchase outside of Patreon? It's an amazing device. Thank you so much. At the moment, not. I also don't know if it's too smart to do so, because if I do make it a VST, maintaining it and fixing things is going to be like, if someone has a problem, I can fix it within 3 minutes. I can fix the thing in the patch, upload the new file, and you can download it and it'll work. VSTs are way slower. So, and on top of that, I would have to, I don't know, I'll show you. This is the amount of plugged out patches that I have made already. Right here. You can see there's a ton of them. So another one, for example, is Silk, which is sort of a, like a soothe. So if you use that, you can use that instead of soothe and stuff like that. So I can make these plugged out patches actually monthly, almost. I'm not quite there yet. But the thing is that if plug data itself as a plugin gets updated and gets a bunch of improvements, all of my patches get those improvements. That is huge, and that happens then for all of them at the same time, right? So there's so many benefits to having them be patches, similar to like how you can have an FL patcher, but say it's all stock plugins, where a lot of these patches will benefit from improvements from plug data, and maintaining them is going to be a lot easier compared to actually having VSTs. And I actually did some tests. I can just quickly show this as the sort of final thing of the stream as well. If you have concerns regarding CPU usage, because it's a patch within a plugin, let me show you this. I'm going to bring in a melody loop here. And I'm going to load up Specom Light 2. So if I stop playing it, you can see the CPU usage actually drops to 0%. So it's not using any CPU. If I play it, using Specom Light 2 uses about 1% CPU. If I open it up, it uses a little bit more because it has to render some visuals for you. And it's doing it in a very particular way that's kind of a limitation to plug data. Let's compare that to OTT, right? So if I load up OTT within Ableton, let's play it. We're sitting at the same 1%. Let's compare it to Specom Light. 1%. So the CPU difference is actually quite small, which is great. I've managed to get it down like super low, and it's in this very specific setup that it works, and it means that you don't really have to worry that it doesn't work like a plugin. The only thing that you have to make sure is that if you download the zip file and you extract the folder, have it somewhere where it can stay for a long time. You don't want to be moving around the folder because it can then break all the projects where the GUI doesn't load correctly. The patch itself will still load correctly, just the UI won't if the file path isn't the same for the patch that you loaded in that project. That will be fixed though with the next plug data update. it'll work differently in the next plug data update. Plug data used to be traumatizing in the past. It was sluggish. Yes, it was. It used to be incredibly broken. Like not broken, but like unstable. Right? It had so many crashes. I actually sat down with the developer and we set up a debug environment on my computer, so that I was able to catch all the things that were crashing plug data on Windows. So basically, I used it for a couple of days, and every time I would crash, I would send them the crash log, and then they would fix it, give me the new version, and then if I had another crash, I would send it again. So we were essentially doing a debug so that plug data would be a lot more stable. And now it is very, very stable. It's very much usable in projects, to the point where the Phaseplant demo that I showed actually was using a lot of Specoms, and I had to remove all of them because I wanted it to be kilohertz only. So I had to completely restructure the way I did the mix, and I was actually struggling a little bit because it's so much easier to mix with Specom Light. It's so much easier. If everything is already catered towards a perfect full pink noise slope, then it's so easy to mix. You hard carry debugging for plug data. Yes, I wanted to make sure that it's really usable, right? That it can really replace everything. Thank you, Chris. Life without spectral compression is just pain. It is. But there's also just like not many good options out there. The melted production is a decent option, but it is a bit cumbersome to use. The free spectral compressor is not the best option because it is very noisy, because it doesn't have any smoothing. And then there's not really many other options. Erksound's Bloom is actually kind of decent, but they actually target, I think, something like brown noise, which is crazy, and it's really hard to set it to be pink noise. And also it uses I-Lok, and I just strictly don't use anything that uses I-Lok. Yes, Ozone's Clarity module is really good too. Yeah. Actually, you can combine OTT and Clarity, and you can get somewhat similar results. Not really, but you can kind of get there. Yeah. But yeah, so what's really important is that you have a really good smoothing algorithm, so it can sort of sound more towards something like multiband compression, and it can adhere to the original frequency response a little bit better compared to just completely flattening, which was one of the problems I had. Mulder actually has a really good smoothing algorithm in it. The only thing I personally wished in the Phos spectral compressor is to draw the curve. Yes, I actually had drawing the curve in Specom Light for the up to 1.6. I did have it, but I actually never found really much of a use case for it. The problem is because you don't really actually want that, because the resolution of the FFT isn't high enough. But what I would rather recommend is that you just use the flat tilt, and then what you do is you use EQ after, because regular EQs are essentially infinite resolution, right? Where the FFT is not. Thank you for your recommendation on Discord. I tried out every plug data patches and every single one is sick, dude. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. What's the I-Lok beef? Well, it's just kind of anti-consumer in terms of how they handle activating and deactivating, and if you have a new computer and you reset Windows, or Windows is, you have to do a bunch of stuff there. Even trials, if I get a new computer, I would expect that I would be able to try a plugin again, say a couple months later after I've tried it the first time. Maybe I'll consider it again and I'll try it out again. Maybe now I have a use case when I buy it. I can't because it's using I-Lok, and I can only try the trial once, stuff like that. I-Lok is just a pain. Most plugins are not supported with I-Lok Cloud. If all the I-Lok plugins supported I-Lok Cloud, I'd have no problem using it personally. Oh yeah, that probably as well, yeah. I had to mail I-Lok about 5 times for setting up my Linux distros. Oh no. Yes, some plugins even have limited activations, exactly. I just don't like it. I'm quite against I-Lok. I understand that it's maybe fairly easy to implement, and it's decently robust, but it's just like cracking is going to happen regardless. And oftentimes I see people mention that I-Lok, the cracked version actually runs better because it doesn't use I-Lok. I-Lok Cloud is a legit savior to I-Lok. Too bad companies are shitty. Yeah. I don't like it. I like plug data because it's open source and free, and so it's quite easy. And what's really cool as well is you can go into the patches and check out how they're done, right? So you can kind of backwards engineer, and you can make your own even, or you can change it slightly if you don't like something about it. Hello. I was actually just about to end the stream. You can get the plugin on my Patreon. It is a patch actually for a plugin. The plugin itself is free, but the patch is on my Patreon. It's called Plug Data. But yeah, besides that, I'm going to be playing the Phaseplant demo track in the background a little bit, and then I'll sort of fade out the stream. Rename the title. But besides that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And perhaps I will be streaming again soon, but next time it'll probably just be music, right? Making music. And besides showing off the new Plug Data patch. Also unrelated, but but you have a different UI for your Patreon. How do you do that? Do I? I guess I do. Some beta stuff, I think. I guess I never had any issues as I don't switch PCs frequently at all. Yeah, I switch PCs all the time. I just went from a laptop back to a mini ITX. Have a good one, dude. Great catching you. Yeah, you have a great one, dude. Too, Dirkcat. All of you, thank you for sticking around. I'll be ending the stream now. And have a great time using Spectral compressors. Bye-bye.